It is a cold Sunday night in Chicago. November 22nd, 1987. The weekend is ending. The city is winding down. Television sets glow in living rooms across the suburbs and the inner city alike. And on one of the largest local stations in America, the WGN 9 O'Clock news is moving through its sports segment. Anchor Dan Roan is discussing the Chicago Bears. It is routine, familiar, predictable, and then all at once the picture disappears. For a moment, viewers are left staring at darkness and noise. There is no warning, no explanation, no sense that anything is wrong beyond the quiet, almost ordinary confusion of a signal gone bad. But when the image returns, what appears on screen is not a technical glitch and not the man who was speaking a second earlier. Instead, a figure in a Max Headroom mask stares back from the television. The mask is exaggerated and uncanny, fixed in a synthetic grin. The head rocks strangely from side to side. Behind the figure is a sheet of corrugated metal, turning slowly to imitate the geometric motion backdrop associated with the real Max Headroom character. The sound is not speech, only an abrasive electronic buzzing. It looks less like a prank than an intrusion from somewhere outside the normal logic of television itself. Then it is gone. WGN regains control. Dan Roan reappears, visibly shaken, and says what millions of viewers are already thinking. If you are wondering what happened, so is he. In any other year, on any other night, that would have been enough to secure a place in local broadcast history. But that was only the first interruption. Roughly 2 hours later, it happened again. This time, the target was WTTW, Chicago's PBS affiliate. The program on air was Doctor Who, a fittingly strange backdrop for what came next. The same masked figure returned, again framed against corrugated metal, but now the audio was working. A distorted voice, high and theatrical, spoke in fragments. It referenced local television personalities. It held up a can of Pepsi. It hummed. It babbled. It mocked. At one point, it exposed its bare backside and was spanked with a fly swatter by another unidentified person partially visible on screen. 90 seconds later, the hijacker vanished. The episode resumed. The Federal Communications Commission investigated. So did the FBI and local authorities. Broadcast engineers studied the footage and the transmission path. Technicians attempted to reconstruct how it had been done. Reporters chased rumors. Amateur sleuths spent decades revisiting every frame and every word. No one was ever caught. No one was ever officially identified. And nearly 40 years later, the Max Headroom broadcast hijacking remains one of the strangest unsolved media crimes in American history. Because this was more than a prank. It was an attack on trust. It was a demonstration of technical skill. And it was a moment, brief and absurd as it seemed, when someone proved that even the most authoritative medium of the era could be broken into and rewritten from the outside. Tonight, we are going back to that November evening, to the technology that made the hijack possible, to the people who may have pulled it off, and to the unsettling reason this footage still feels disturbing all these years later. To understand why the Max Headroom incident had such force, it helps to remember what television was in 1987. Today, video is everywhere. It lives in our pockets. It is fragmented across social platforms, streaming services, and millions of private channels. We are used to interruption. We are used to distortion. We are used to the feeling that any image can be manipulated, remixed, or thrown into our feed without warning. But in the late 1980s, television still carried a special kind of authority. For most households, the television set was a central object. It delivered the evening news, the weather, live sports, sitcoms, political events, and emergency information. Programming was linear. The audience watched what was scheduled when it was scheduled. If something aired live, it entered homes all at once. There was no instant replay on demand, no search bar, no archive one click away. If you missed it, you missed it. If something strange appeared, there was often no immediate way to verify what you had just seen. This gave broadcast television a peculiar power. The image on the screen felt official by default. Viewers did not usually question who controlled it. That control belonged to networks, station operators, regulators, and engineers hidden behind the polished surface of entertainment and news. The signal seemed stable because almost nobody ever saw the machinery that produced it. And that is precisely what makes signal intrusion so unsettling. It forces the audience to confront the fact that the image was never sacred. It was a transmission, path, a chain of equipment, and under the right conditions, that chain could be interrupted. By 1987, Chicago was one of the largest and most competitive television markets in the United States. Major stations operated from tall buildings in the downtown core. Microwave relays sent programming from studios to transmitter sites. Engineering crews kept the machinery running, often with routines shaped by time of day, staffing, and technical limitations. The system worked well enough to feel permanent, until one night when someone showed that it was not. There is another reason the incident became unforgettable, and it has to do with the choice of disguise. Max Headroom was not a random mask. He was a fictional media personality born in British science fiction and then popularized for wider audiences in the 1980s. The character was presented as an artificial, computer-generated host from a dystopian media future. He spoke in stutters, glitches, and abrupt tonal pivots. He was smug, synthetic, and satirical all at once. Even the visual concept behind him suggested a world in which television had become self-aware, unstable, and absurd. In the fiction, Max Headroom was a product of the media machine and also a commentary on it. He represented digitized personality, corporate broadcasting pushed into parody, and the idea that television could create an identity more vivid than the human beings behind it. In commercials and television appearances, he was ironic, frenetic, and impossible to ignore. By the mid-1980s, he was recognizable enough that a mask of his face communicated something immediately. It signaled artificiality. It signaled television culture. It signaled glitch. And more importantly, it signaled intrusion. To appear in a Max Headroom mask while literally hijacking a television signal was either a brilliant conceptual joke, a piece of performance art, or a prank so intuitively perfect that it achieved symbolic power by accident. Either way, the choice transformed the event. Had the hijacker worn a plain ski mask or Halloween costume, the incident might have been remembered as an odd technical stunt. But by using the face of a fictional media entity, the perpetrators created something that felt self-aware long before that became common language in everyday media criticism. The image implied a message, even if no message was ever clearly delivered. Television had been interrupted by a creature that belonged inside television. That alone helped make the footage unforgettable. The first hijack took place at approximately 9:14 p.m. during WGN sports coverage. The interruption was brief, but its brevity may have contributed to its impact. It felt like a break in reality rather than an event with time to develop. Viewers barely had enough time to process what they were seeing before the station retook control. From a technical perspective, this first intrusion appears to have targeted the microwave link between WGN studio operations and the station's transmission infrastructure. In the analog era, many stations relied on line-of-sight microwave links to carry content from one point to another, often from the studio to a transmitter or relay site atop a major building. These links were effective, but they were also vulnerable in ways most viewers never considered. There was no modern encryption handshake. There was no robust authentication in the sense audiences now associate with digital security. If an attacker possessed a sufficiently strong transmitter, knew the correct frequency, had a clean enough line of sight, and aimed accurately at the intended receiver, it was possible to overpower the legitimate signal. The receiving equipment would lock onto the stronger or cleaner input. In engineering terms, this is related to the capture effect. In practical terms, it meant that if you shouted loudly enough into the right part of the system, the tower might repeat your message instead of the station's. That was not easy. It required equipment. It required knowledge. It required timing. And it required the confidence to carry out a felony against a major broadcaster. The WGN interruption lasted only around half a minute. Some contemporary accounts placed the fully visible pirate image at a shorter duration within that window. Engineers at the station reacted quickly by shifting frequency and re-establishing the proper feed. The hijacker, perhaps expecting this possibility, made no attempt to speak during the WGN break. Whether because the audio chain was incomplete, the transmission was only a test, or the perpetrators wanted to minimize the chance of failure, the visual alone had to carry the effect. And it did. There is something uniquely disturbing about silent interruption. Without speech, viewers are denied explanation. The human brain reaches for narrative and gets none. It sees motion, pattern, intention, but not meaning. The result is closer to nightmare logic than comedy. That silent, swaying figure was enough to announce that someone had discovered a way in. If the WGN interruption was a test or a proof of concept, then the second hijack was the full performance. At around 11:15 or 11:20 p.m., depending on the source, the pirates struck again, this time during WTTW's broadcast of Doctor Who. The timing could hardly have been better if the goal was to produce cultural aftershock. Viewers who were already watching an eerie British science fiction serial suddenly found themselves confronted with something far stranger and unmistakably real. The same Max Headroom figure appears, this time better framed and accompanied by audio. The voice is electronically distorted into a high, shrill register. The speech is fragmented and surreal, bouncing from one reference to the next. Some lines seem directed at local media figures. Others sound improvised. Some may be inside jokes. Still others may be deliberately meaningless. This ambiguity is a large part of why the clip has been reanalyzed for decades. The hijacker references Chuck Swirsky, a local sportscaster associated with WGN. He uses the phrase "greatest world newspaper nerds," a mocking spin on WGN's famous call letter origin, often rendered as world's greatest newspaper. He holds up a Pepsi can and invokes ad language associated with Max Headroom's corporate commercial persona. He hums a few notes from Clutch Cargo, an old animated series whose eerie limited animation style has itself become a minor object of fascination. He gestures obscenely. He produces props. He moans. He rambles about his glove. He mentions piles. He announces nothing coherent enough to count as a manifesto. And then the scene becomes even stranger. Near the end of the clip, a second figure appears. The masked performer bends partly out of frame and exposes his rear while another person, apparently female or at least presenting as such in costume, swats him with a fly swatter. The performer yelps and complains as the tape collapses into static and the station regains its signal. This is one reason the footage resists easy interpretation. If the goal had been political messaging, the content was too chaotic. If the goal had been simple technical demonstration, the content was too theatrical. If the goal had been pure comedy, the technical execution was too sophisticated. The WTTW segment feels like the work of people who understood both engineering and absurd performance. It is juvenile but not accidental, crude but carefully staged, meaningless on the surface, yet too specific in its references to be random. That mix of precision and nonsense is what makes the incident so difficult to classify. For decades, the central practical question has been simple. How was this actually accomplished? The answer lies in the structure of analog broadcasting at the time. A television station's signal path was not a single monolithic source. Programs were created in studios, processed through control rooms, transmitted by links to remote sites, and then broadcast from elevated towers. In large cities, those towers and receivers were often mounted on skyscrapers. Microwave links operated in highly directional paths. This made them efficient, but it also created vulnerable choke points. To interrupt such a link, a pirate broadcaster would need a transmitter operating on the same frequency, enough power to dominate the legitimate signal at the receiver, and a directional antenna aimed precisely enough to make the receiver favor the pirate transmission. Because these links depended on line of sight, the hijacker likely had to be located somewhere with a physical view toward the relevant receiving site. In Chicago, with the John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower then serving as major broadcast landmarks, this constrained the possible geography but did not narrow it enough for investigators to identify a precise launch point after the fact. Experts have long speculated that the equipment involved may have included hardware similar to what live television news crews used at the time, especially high-powered microwave transmission gear such as a traveling wave tube amplifier. This was not consumer equipment. It was expensive, specialized, and generally associated with the broadcast industry. That fact immediately pushed suspicion toward people with professional access, technical training, or both. Then there was the question of timing. To hit WGN once and WTTW later the same evening suggested preparation. The perpetrators knew which frequencies to target or how to determine them. They knew enough about staffing and response capability to recognize that late-night conditions might favor a longer intrusion at WTTW. They had pre-recorded video ready to transmit. They had at least one costume, one backdrop, and apparently at least one accomplice. They were organized enough to execute the first intrusion, withdraw, and then attempt a second on a separate station. This was not a teenager improvising with hobby equipment from a bedroom. Even if the exact hardware remains uncertain, almost every serious analysis reaches the same conclusion. Whoever did this almost certainly understood television engineering better than the average person. Once the second hijack occurred, the matter escalated quickly. Signal intrusion was not merely embarrassing. It was a federal matter. The FCC treated unauthorized interference with licensed broadcast operations as a serious offense. Authorities began investigating almost immediately. Station engineers preserved what they could. Media coverage spread the story. And because the footage itself was so bizarre, public fascination accelerated the pressure to find an answer. But investigations of technical crimes are often strongest in the hours immediately after the event. If equipment is abandoned, witnesses come forward, or operational mistakes are made, there is a trail. If not, the path cools quickly. In the Max Headroom case, the trail cooled fast. No one was caught near the likely transmission points. No vehicle was tied to the event. No equipment was recovered publicly in connection with the hijack. No one confessed in any official capacity. Investigators reportedly interviewed numerous people within the Chicago broadcast community, including technicians and engineers who might have possessed the skills or access required. Unofficial accounts over the years have suggested that authorities developed theories and even had particular individuals in mind. But suspicion is not evidence, and evidence was exactly what they lacked. That is one of the paradoxes of the incident. The stunt was sophisticated enough to imply a relatively small pool of capable perpetrators, yet fleeting enough to leave almost nothing concrete behind. The very expertise that made the hijack possible may also explain why nobody was ever charged. Someone familiar with broadcast systems would know not only how to interrupt a signal, but how quickly to shut down, what risks to avoid, and how to prevent obvious forensic mistakes. If the perpetrators were indeed insiders or semi-insiders, they may also have understood how chaotic the first hours of the investigation would be, and how little physical evidence a short-distance signal attack might leave. Over time, the official inquiry appears to have faded without resolution. The case lingered in a kind of technical limbo, open in theory, cold in practice. And that coldness allowed mythology to grow. Because no one was identified, the vacuum filled with stories. Some theories focus on disgruntled station employees or former engineers, people with enough inside knowledge to know the frequencies, relay paths, and weak points. Others suggest local video artists, pranksters, or technically adept hobbyists who moved near the edges of television production and countercultural media. There are theories about friends working together, theories about rivalries, theories about a private joke that got vastly out of hand. One of the most widely discussed rumors emerged decades later, when an anonymous poster on 4chan claimed to be related to one of the perpetrators and described a small group of technically skilled young men who allegedly carried out the hijack with borrowed or accessible professional gear. The story was detailed enough to seem plausible to many readers. It described multiple participants and fit the broad logic investigators had long suspected. But plausible is not the same as true. The post offered no verifiable proof and never led to a confirmed identification. Like so much else in the Max Headroom story, it sits in an uncomfortable middle ground between likely and useless. There have also been repeated attempts by journalists and internet investigators to match the voice, build, humor, or cultural references in the clip to known figures in Chicago's underground media scene. Some names circulate more than others. Some people have been loosely accused based on style or rumor. A few have reportedly denied involvement. None of it has reached the level of proof. What does seem increasingly likely is that more than one person was involved. The WTTW clip alone strongly suggests collaboration. Someone had to perform. Someone likely handled recording or playback. Someone had to manage the transmission equipment and antenna alignment, unless the setup was unusually streamlined. And then there is the apparent accomplice with the fly swatter. The incident feels less like the product of a lone genius than a small, tightly coordinated group. That matters because it changes the psychology of the event. A solitary hijacker would suggest obsession. A group suggests culture, private shared language, collective joke, maybe even a subculture of technical insiders who understood both how ridiculous and how dangerous the stunt really was. If that is true, then the silence afterward becomes even more remarkable. Keeping a secret among multiple people for nearly 4 decades is difficult. And yet, if the perpetrators did speak privately, nothing definitive ever surfaced. Most old mysteries become less frightening with time. As fashions change and technology advances, the artifacts of a previous era can begin to look quaint. The Max Headroom footage does the opposite. Part of this is visual. The analog degradation, the off-kilter composition, the imperfect costume, and the low-fidelity audio all combine to produce something that feels contaminated rather than cleanly fictional. It resembles found footage before found footage became a genre cliché. It looks like an accident, but one with intention. That makes the mind uneasy. Another part is structural. Broadcast television represented centralized authority. When the interruption happens, that authority is punctured in real time. It is not just a scary image appearing on a screen. It is the mechanism of trust failing before the viewer's eyes. The station is supposed to control the frame. Suddenly, it does not. This is why the clip still feels transgressive in a way that many later internet-age hoaxes do not. Today, any bizarre video might simply be another upload among millions. In 1987, to appear uninvited on live television was to seize a platform that almost nobody outside institutions could access. It felt impossible, and therefore it felt potent. There is also the matter of intent. Human beings are good at tolerating the frightening when they understand what it is for. A horror film is manageable because it is entertainment. A protest interruption is legible because it has a message. A comedy sketch is safe because it wants laughter. But the Max Headroom hijack resists clear categorization. It is funny in places, but not reassuringly funny. It is threatening in mood, but not openly violent. It seems to mock television, yet never quite explains its grievance. It gestures toward message and then abandons message in favor of nonsense. That unresolved intent is unnerving. It leaves the viewer with no stable moral or narrative frame. Was this satire? Was it revenge? Was it an in-joke meant for a handful of people in Chicago's broadcast world? Was it a demonstration of access, done simply because it could be done? No answer ever arrives. And so the footage remains suspended between prank and intrusion, between absurdism and sabotage. There is another reason the incident endures. It belongs to a transitional moment in technological history. The hijack could happen because analog broadcasting contains specific vulnerabilities tied to power, frequency, geography, and hardware. As television systems modernized and later moved toward digital transmission, recreating the stunt became far more difficult. The architecture changed. Security expectations changed. Entire workflows disappeared. That makes the Max Headroom incident feel like a relic from a narrow window when the physical infrastructure of mass media was exposed enough for a knowledgeable intruder to seize it, yet culturally dominant enough for such a seizure to produce real shock. It was, in that sense, both early and late. Too early for the internet to instantly identify the culprits. Too late for true broadcast piracy to be common. Close enough to the corporate television age that the symbolism landed perfectly. If it had happened 10 or 15 years later, it might have been investigated with stronger digital records. If it had happened much earlier, the iconography would have lacked the same self-aware media satire. It occurred at almost the ideal moment to become legend. And legend is exactly what it became. The footage was copied to tapes, replayed on retrospectives, uploaded to the internet, dissected in forums, featured in podcasts, and folded into the folklore of unsolved mysteries. Every new generation encountering it seems to experience the same mixture of amusement and unease. It is ridiculous. It is juvenile. It is technically impressive. It is somehow still creepy. And above all, it is unfinished. After decades of speculation, we can at least sketch the outline of the most plausible scenario. A small group of technically capable people in or around Chicago, likely with some degree of access to broadcast equipment or knowledge of professional transmission practice, decided to stage a signal intrusion using pre-recorded video featuring a Max Headroom costume and backdrop. They selected WGN first, perhaps because it was prominent and because its relay structure offered a workable opening. The first interruption succeeded, but only briefly, because engineers were present and reacted quickly. Encouraged or committed already to a second attempt, they later targeted WTTW under conditions that allowed a longer overtake. Whether by design or by luck, they struck during a period when countermeasures would be slower. They transmitted the more elaborate pre-recorded segment with audio, props, and the second performer. Then, before authorities could localize them, they shut down, packed their equipment, and disappeared. That is the broad scenario most consistent with what is known. What remains unknown are the names, the exact location, the precise equipment chain, and the motive. Those missing pieces are what keep the case alive. Because if the perpetrators were never caught, then somewhere, for all these years, ordinary life continued around an extraordinary secret. Someone went back to work on Monday. Someone laughed privately at newspaper coverage. Someone maybe kept a duplicate tape in a box, or maybe destroyed every trace. Someone aged from youth into middle age carrying the memory of one of the most infamous unauthorized broadcasts ever transmitted. And if they are still alive, they have outlived the era they hacked. The Max Headroom TV hijack endures because it strikes at something deeper than nostalgia for old media. It reminds us that systems of communication derive their power not just from technology, but from confidence. We believe the broadcast because the broadcast appears stable. We trust the channel because we assume someone trustworthy controls it. For a few seconds on WGN and a minute and a half on WTTW, that assumption collapsed. The screen no longer belonged to the station. It belonged to whoever had found a way inside. That violation felt alarming in 1987, and it still feels eerie now, not because the content itself is profound, but because of what the act revealed. Behind the smooth surface of mass media, there were weak points, relay paths, human routines, and exploitable seams. Someone saw those seams clearly enough to turn them into a performance. And what a performance it was. Not elegant, not noble, not even coherent, but unforgettable. A rubber mask, a spinning metal backdrop, a buzzing signal, a second intrusion during Doctor Who, a can of Pepsi, a fly swatter, and then silence. No confession, no arrest, no final explanation. Just one of the strangest nights in American television history, preserved on damaged recordings and passed from one generation of viewers to the next like a message from a broken channel. Somewhere in Chicago on that November night, someone removed that Max Headroom mask, powered down the equipment, and vanished back into the city. They were never caught. And because they were never caught, the story never really ended. It only faded into static.